All right. So in the first part of the class, we looked at our marquee tools, specifically our rectangular and marquee. And we also looked at our lasso tools, straight lasso, polygonal lasso, and the magnetic lasso tool. I'm assuming you guys have no questions on that right now. Okay, so let's move on to a few tools which seem to make your life a bit easier when it comes to making selections, right? And I would call them your automatic selection tools, right? And they include your quick selection tool and the magic wand, right? Let's have a first look at the magic wand, all right? And anybody ever used the magic wand before?
No, sir. I don't use it now.
No?
I haven't used it.
Anybody can tell me how we use the magic wand tool? What is its purpose? No? All right, so we use the magic wand tool to select a range of color, all right? So with most images that we're looking at, we're going to have quite a bit of different colors mixed in the design, creating the image that you actually see, right? But there are times when you have images that are essentially one color or a few colors, or just a small range of colors, all right? Everybody can see my screen right now? Yes? We have a white flower on top of a bluish background, all right? And our background, it has quite a bit of color, but two main tones, right? We can almost group them together. So what we can do with the magic wand tool is, if we're trying to isolate the flower, right? We can easily isolate it by, instead of selecting the flower itself, selecting the background and then reversing the selection so that we then have the reverse or the inverse selected, which will be the flower, all right? So the magic wand tool is very simple. Once you select it, magic wand tool, you want to set a tolerance. The tolerance ranges from 0 to 255. And basically, the lower the tolerance is the smaller the range of color that you're going to select. So let's start with a tolerance of 5, right? I'm going to click once in the dark area up here. Everybody sees the selection that was made?
Yes, sir.
All right, it's not that great, right? We could actually, because we have add to selection selected, we could click a few more times, right? And actually make a selection. But as you notice, it's not really giving us exactly what we want. It's making a bunch of small selections because as the color is changing, it's cutting off our selection. Let us increase the tolerance to something like 75. Yeah, it is. So we increase our tolerance to 75. I'm going to deselect. So select, deselect, all right? Sorry, deselect, right? So we have nothing selected, right? You want to ensure you have your layer selected though, right? And with the tolerance of 75, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on the dark blue area up here, a single click. Look at that now. That's much better, right? You can see it's selected almost all of the blue area on top here. Still not everything, but we have add to selection selected. So we can just click a few more times, just click in the lighter area here, right? You can see what happened. It select most of it, but we also now begin selecting our flower, right? So I'm gonna go back. I mean, 75 might be a little bit too much to make the distinction between the white flower and the light areas of the background here. So edit. I'm gonna undo magic wand, right, to step back because this part was okay. Let's drop the tolerance now. Let's say to about 25. Let's drop it to 25, right? And we're gonna continue modifying our selection. We want to go until we have the entire background selected, right, but not the flower. So we're gonna click again. Notice we add into selection. Click. Not that great, but did a pretty good job. Let's deal with the parts closer to the flower now. All right. And we actually just gonna click a few times Excuse me? Somebody saying something? All right. So there we have it, mostly done. Essentially, what part of the image is currently selected right now? Is it the flower or is it the background? Can anybody tell me?
Background.
The background. How do we get the flower selected from this point?
We have to invert the layer.
Right, we can not invert the layer, but invert the selection. So we can do that, right? We can do that easily by, once we have our selection tool still selected, we could right click, right? And select inverse, right? We could also find an option here on the select menu and inverse. Shortcut is Shift Control I. Once we do that, everything that is currently selected is going to be unselected, and everything that is not currently selected is going to be selected. All right, so let's just click select inverse, and now we have the flower selected. Again, not a perfect selection, but from where we started, that's a pretty good selection. Everybody see how we did that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, what if you want to isolate it on a layer by itself?
So I didn't add to selection again.
Are we doing?
Because my own just not added. So I have to see what
add to selection. With a selection tool selected, you need to go to the options bar at the top and select this option here. The first one is new selection. The second one is add to selection. You see it? Yeah. And then you can add to your selection. Yeah. Okay. So let's take it again. This time we're going to use the same tool, the Magic Wand tool, but instead of selecting the background, we're actually going to attempt to select the flower. It's mostly white, so it should be relatively easy, all right? And I'm going to mix our selection type. So we're going to use the Magic Wand, and I'm going to use also the marquee. So let us keep the tolerance at 25, and we're going to try this time to select the flower, all right? Starting with the white petals. So 25, click. That might be a little bit low. Let's bring it up to 50. All right, add to selection, and let's see what we have. So, yeah, so a tolerance of 50, if you notice, selected quite a bit much, right? It selected more than we wanted, but we can fix that. It's selected more than we wanted on the outside and less than we wanted on the inside. How do we modify that selection to select just the flower, but nothing else? Anybody can help me out at this point?
Let's subtract from.
All right, so we're gonna subtract from selection, yes. And we can use the same Magic Wand tool. Let's drop the tolerance a little bit lower. Let's drop it to about 20. And then we can click in the areas that we don't want selected, like here. And it should subtract it from the selection. Like here as well. I should subtract it from the selection. Everybody sees that? Now look at the flower. The flower is mostly selected, all of the petals, but the little pollen area, the yellow area in the center is actually not selected. You guys see that, right?
Yes, sir, we see it.
What would be the easiest way to add that to our current selection?
Add to.
Excuse me? Add to, yes. But again, I'm going to switch the tool. So I'm going to switch from my Magic Wand tool, because although this looks yellow, it has yellow, orange, dark areas. So the Magic Wand is going to create a mess if we attempt to select on it, right? It's going to select a bunch of, let me just zoom in so you can see. Because of all of the variety of color, it's not really the most ideal tool, right? So you can see it's making a bunch of little selections. But here's what we can do. I can switch to my elliptical marquee, right? Because I can combine my selection tools. Notice it does not affect my selection. And now we can switch to add to selection, right? And I'm just going to click and drag to make an elliptical selection. Everybody can see it. Release. And now it added that area that was selected in the center to my selection. And now our flower is entirely selected. Everybody sees that?
So that again. So that
You
again.
can do that again, please.
All right, let's go back again. So at this point, let me layer via copy so we can see what we have selected. We can see it was just the petals, right? None of the yellow inside.
Yes, sir.
Let's make that selection back. So that selection is the same as the copy here. Notice all of the white petals are selected, but the yellow area in the center is not, all right? If we want to add that to the selection, we can use the, and again, only because it's round, we could have quite as easily used the rectangular marquee, but we went with the elliptical marquee because it will allow us to create a circular selection. We ensure that add to selection is selected. So what add to selection will do will allow us to make a selection and add it to what is currently selected, right? So we want to select the area in the center here. So we go a little bit on the outside to ensure that we can select the entire thing, and we click and drag, make the selection, and now it's added to our flower selection. If you right click, layer via copy, make the background invisible. Now we have the flower by itself with all of the parts, well, the petals and the centerpiece as part of the layer. Everybody get that? Let me know if you did not get it. All right. So everybody has a pretty good understanding of the Magic Wand tool. Yes? Let's have another example. I have another example here. This is a graduation picture of a lady isolated on a yellow background. If I wanted to extract this lady from the background, what tool do you think would be a good one to use? Anybody? What tool should I use if I wanted to extract this lady from
Magic wand, the magic wand tool.
Magic wand. Why the magic wand?
Because the colors kind of like
It's a solid color.
Right,
Yeah.
because you have a solid color background, which means you can very easily isolate it using the magic wand, right? Because the magic wand selects a range of color. So I'm setting my tolerance here to about 20. It may be a little bit high because you can see some areas where her complexion is pretty close to the background, but we'll tweak it as we go along. And we want to click once on the background, all right? And you can see it gave us a pretty good selection, but not perfect. So let's increase it a little bit more. Let's say 30 this time. And we just click in again. So we're gonna add to selection. We're gonna select everything that's currently selected and a little bit more this time. So we click in again. All right, let's zoom out. You can see we have a pretty good selection of the background here, all right? However, let's zoom in. You can see in some areas it didn't do quite a great job with her fingers, right? How can we fix this? How would you go ahead and fix the selection? So just to illustrate, if I were to right click now, layer via copy, what we have is the background currently selected. This is what it looks like, all right? Just for your reference. Let's go back. You can see it did a bad job on the selection of her fingers. How can we fix this area of the selection here? All right. For a manual selection like that, the tool of choice would be our lasso tools, right? So I'm gonna jump to my favorite lasso, the Polygonal Lasso, and I'm going to edit the selection to try and get it a little bit better around her hand and her fingers area, all right? So the first thing I want to do is we want to remove all of the areas that should not be selected, where it's selected too much. Remember, the background is currently selected, so everywhere her finger is selected, we want to remove it from the selection. So we subtract from selection, and we essentially go around removing her fingers from the areas that are selected. All right, that's one finger. Let's go again. I'm not sure how much detail you guys are seeing streaming across the net. Let me know if you're getting what I'm doing here.
I see what you doing properly.
I say you're not seeing it?
I seen what you're doing properly.
Okay, cool. Right, so we just essentially refining our selection now to get just what we want selected. Notice there's a little bit of space in between her fingers here now that should be selected, but it's not. So we're going to switch. We're gonna switch to our add to selection tool, right? And then we're going to select on the inside of her finger here. Choose our selection. All right, and here we can do a little bit of editing here as well. All right, and if we really wanted to we could refine the edge here. Run around the edge of her hand to get a little bit of a smoother selection. So even though the Magic Wand tool makes it very easy to select our object, you realize that if we have to get a perfect selection, we still sometimes need to come and refine with our lasso tools, which is why I want you to get the hang of using the lasso tools, all right? Because that is the tool that you will use to refine your selections to get them perfect, all right? So now we have the background selected. Yes? How do we isolate the girl on a layer by herself now?
We'll have to invert, or you have to do the inverse of the selected.
Right.
Of the background.
Well, let me show you.
One selector.
Right. We could inverse the selection. So rather than have the background selected, we would have the girl selected. But we could also do something destructive. Remember in the last class, we spoke about destructive and non-destructive editing?
Yes.
Look at this. We could just press the delete key right now and delete the background. Yeah?
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm going to go back because I do not want to delete the background. Why? Because I want to maintain non-destructive techniques as much as possible. The reason is because let's say I overlooked something and I made a bad selection, right? If I just delete the pixels, then they're not there for me to refer to come back to if I notice later on I made a mistake, right? So we're going to select inverse. So we now have the girl selected and we're going to layer via copy, right? So we have essentially the same effect, but we have the original layer one in its original format, so we can always come back to it to make a modification if we need to. All right, but layer two is our object isolated by itself. Everybody get that? The object isolated by itself, we can now move it around as an independent object, or we can easily just drag it actually onto another document. So let's just throw behind the car and make it look like somebody got a really awesome graduation present. Maybe not the most perfect displacement, but you get the idea, right? Everybody good with that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just throw it there.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So at this point, you should be able to, using your tools, right? A combination of your lasso tools and the magic wand tool, isolate almost any object, all right? Now, as we get into the end of the class, I know all your brains might be bursting a little bit, so I leave the easiest tools for last, all right? Make it easy for you. Let's get back to this original image, this original car, which was probably our most difficult selection, right? And this time we're going to select it using another tool, right? And this tool is called the quick selection tool. The quick selection is one of the newest selection tools to be added to Photoshop, and it's really a time saver, as the name implies, quick selection. So what you do is you first select a brush size, right? So a size. Notice this is a pretty big brush. We want a brush that can fit into all of the areas that we want to select. So not too big, but not too small either. We could set the hardness of the brush, meaning how crisp the edge is going to be. A hard brush will have a crisp edge. A soft brush or a hardness of 0 will have a softer edge or fuzzy edge, right? So let's set our edge pretty hard, right? And we can also adjust the shape of our brush, right? So notice this is a circle. Let's make it a little bigger. This is a circle, but if we want to get inside the little crevices, we could adjust it so that it has more of an oval shape. We can adjust the angle as well, right, to get it any way that we like. Let's gonna go with a round brush here. And again, with the quick selection tool, I'm simply clicking on the object, brushing over it a little bit without going off the edges. And I'm going to have Photoshop automatically determine what should be selected. It's not going to be a perfect selection, but the quick selection tool is.
Oh, away from that cloud.
Say that again. Somebody was saying something? Not quite. Okay. All right. So everybody can see here the areas that selected.
Yes, sir.
All right. I've selected a bit too much at the back. How can we remove it from our selection?
So the subtract
Notice it looks different, but it's actually the same option. We have subtract from selection here. So we can click on that tool and we can click on the areas that we don't want included in our selection, and notice Photoshop automatically removes it. All right. Now let's look at a little bit of detail area. Areas where I could not get inside of, see on the shadow here, on the spoiler here, because my brush was a bit too big. If I were to try to do it, it would select more, sorry, add to selection. It would select more than I wanted to select, right? So I'm gonna go back, Control Z. I'm gonna adjust my brush to select just what I need. The spoiler is a pretty horizontal area, so I'm gonna reduce the size of my brush, make it a little bit thinner, right? Adjust the angle, and I'm going to click on the spoiler a little bit, click and drag. Check the angle again, just a little bit. All right. And add these areas to my selection. Now again, probably the best tool to have made that part of the selection with is the Polygonal Lasso, because you can see we still have a little bit of the spoil on the edge, still quite not selected. We could use the quick selection tool and modify our brush slowly and slowly to get the tighter and tighter areas. But again, to demonstrate that we can switch between tools, making a selection, I'm going to jump to my Polygonal Lasso tool. I'm going to add to selection, and then I'm just going to modify the selection by adding the bits and pieces that are not currently part of it to my selection. Yeah, and voila. Let's fix up that little back area here as well. Add this piece. Cool. And then we have that little piece of the rear view mirror here, the side mirror. Let's just add it again to the selection. So just go around the edge of it. Running through really quickly, again, in the interest of time. But when you're making your selections, take your time and try to get them as perfect as you can. A good selection leads to good graphics. And let's take out that little piece at the back here. So subtract, and we just want to remove that piece here. All right. Now we have our objects almost entirely selected.
Oh.
Yes?
A question, sorry. Class almost finished. Only asking because I have accounts. If
Yeah, class almost done basically. I just go
Done.
through the easier selection tools now.
okay.
Okay, so everybody get the quick selection tool? Any questions on the quick selection tool?
No, no questions.
All right, it's actually an easier tool, so I don't expect you to have any questions. But let's isolate our object now. So with the tool selected, the selection tool, we right click and layer by a copy. Let's see what we have. And that is our selection. Everybody get that, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so those are your selection tools. Let me show you an even easier way to select an object, right? The reason I left that option for last is one, it's easier, but two, it doesn't always work all the time. And depending on your image composition, it will not work at all, right? But it's something that you could do. Look at this. If I go select, subject, Photoshop will automatically look at the image, try to figure out what the subject is, and make an intelligent selection for me. So let's see what we have here. Right? So this is Photoshop automatic selection. Notice it made a selection. It chose to leave the shadow out of the selection. But notice it didn't do such a great job at the front. So we still have some modifying to do on that selection. But the bulk of our image was selected automatically. Everybody see that? Yes?
Wait, you can repeat it again?
All right, so the easiest method to select an object, especially if it's just a single object or an image that's composed of one main object, we can simply go to the select menu, ensure the right layer is selected, right? And so select menu, subject. Subject. Select, subject. And Photoshop will automatically, intelligently select your subject for you. It will not be a perfect selection most of the time, but it'll get a bulk of the work done pretty easily with 2 clicks. All right. Once you have your selection like this, you can now jump to one of your other tools like your Polygonal Lasso and make your basic modification. So let's remove this piece of the shadow that we don't want here. So we want to subtract that from selection. Yeah, and let's add the piece of the front bumper here. So we want to add to selection. I'm going to add this piece here. So it's just a matter of tweaking your selection, adding pieces, subtracting pieces until you get it just the way that you like, right? We could also come here and subtract from selection to get some of the road off it. So let's see if we can come closer to the edge of the car here. Side fender. Notice on the straight segments, I can come with a long selection, right? A long segment, sorry. Close my selection here to remove it. And now we have it much closer to the car, all right? We could tweak it and get our spoiler in, but for now, we have a pretty good selection. Let's isolate that, right click, layer via copy. And this is what we left with. Not as great as our manual selection, but you know, less work. Any questions up to this point?
No, sir.
All right. So again, for your homework, I want you to select 2 objects, right? So find an appropriate image, but has a clear subject where you can see all of the edges. And I want you to, well, two images, right? And I want you to primarily using your lasso tools, isolate your objects, right? I want 2 of them and get it onto a layer by itself. Like this, or rather like this. All right, do the best you can with the selections. I want to see nice crisp edges, right? Don't follow me and do lazy selections like that. All right. Here's something else that you should know. Your feather adjusts how fuzzy your edge is. So what I'm going to do is, using my marquee tools, which is easy to see, let's use the elliptical marquee. I'm going to show you what your feather does. So keeping my feather at 0, I'm going to make a selection and right click, layer via copy. This is my selection with my feather at 0. Everybody sees the edges, see how crisp the edges are. Yes? Gonna do the same thing again, but this time I'm going to increase my feather to 80. Right? So click and drag to make a marquee selection. Right click, layer via copy. And look at this. So you can't even exactly tell where the edge is, right? 80 may have been too much. Let's try it with something a little bit less. Let's try it with 20. Right? So make a selection. Right click, layer via copy. Let's see what our selection looks like. Again, it's so fuzzy we can't see it. Let's go with an even smaller feather. So a feather of 10 or 5, actually. Make a selection. Right click, layer via copy. Everybody can see the fuzziness on the edge. So this,
Yes,
this is a selection with a feather of 5, meaning there's a 5 pixel margin on the edge that actually fades out so that you don't see exactly where the edge is. If we have a feather of 0, notice your selection is right on the edge. You have a crisp edge, right? You can see exactly where your edge is. But the higher the feather, the fuzzier the edges and the less defined the edge of your image is. Yeah, so that's what your feather does. Okay, so you can experiment with that when making your selections. One last thing I want to show you. Let's jump to the magic wand tool. So we know the tolerance tells us how much area of color or how much color we're going to select with the magic wand. The higher tolerance means we're going to select more color, right? This option, contiguous, will determine whether your colors are in contiguous segments, meaning they're touching each other, or if they're not touching each other, right? So making a selection of the magic wand, right? If it is contiguous, it means that the magic wand will only select the areas that are touching, right? So notice there may be another shade of red with that exact shade a little further back, but because it's not touching this area, it's not going to be included in the selection. But if I deselect and I remove contiguous, it will select that shade of red everywhere in the design. Front, back, everywhere that meets that shade of red will be selected. Everybody see the difference? So let's go again. With contiguous checked, we click here, it only selects the front parts, none of the areas of the same shade of red at the back. But if we uncheck contiguous, it's going to select all of the areas that have the same shade of red all across the image. All right, so just a few options to look at when you're playing around with your selection tools. Any questions up to this point? I guess we all good.
We're good for now, sir.
Yeah. All right, so everybody understand the homework, right?
So let's go again.
The homework is to select two objects and isolate them as best as you can using primarily your lasso tools. Yeah.
For next class.
For next class. Let me let you know where it's leading up to. In your first homework assignment, I asked you to create a scene for me using only shapes, right? The next scene that you're going to create for me, you're going to use shapes and regular images. So just to give you an example, I just did a quick scene which a girl, it looks like she's hanging out of the window of the driver's
That is
side
part
of
of
the
the
car.
homework call now.
Excuse me?
That is part of the homework for next class.
That is part of the homework for next class. So you actually going to be isolating your objects, right? In practice for using them, that doesn't have to be those exact objects, right? Into a scene, but this time with bitmap images, meaning images with pixels and not just shapes. All right. So after this class, you guys should try your best to master your selection tools, mainly your marquee, your lasso tools, and your intelligent tools, which include your magic wand and your quick selection tool, right? Feel free to see what other options you have in the select menu. For instance, you can select subject, you can select focus area, you can select color range, right? And you can also do other things with your selections. But I'm gonna leave that for now until the next class. Any questions quickly? We have less than a minute before we cut off. Do we need to come back in to answer any other questions?
So I have one question. So the scene is for Thursday?
Excuse me?
The scene is for Thursday, or we just have to cut?
No, I just want the two selections for Thursday. If you can't do the scene, then that's fine.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, guys? Are we all good? All right. If no further questions, we're gonna stop off here.